December 8, 1962. The Copa Room at the Sands was sold out. Frank Sinatra had just finished the first verse of My Way when Vincent Torino walked on stage and whispered 4 words in his ear. The chairman stopped mid-song. 5,000 people watched in stunned silence as Sinatra set down his microphone, looked directly into the spotlight, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do." What Vinny whispered wasn't about a dying child. It was about a federal judge's son tied up in a warehouse on the wrong side of town. The newspapers got it all wrong. The mob got the wrong kid. And Frank Sinatra just became an unwitting accomplice to the biggest kidnapping cover-up in Vegas history. For 60 years, Vinny kept that secret. Until someone started killing everyone who was in that room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Vincent Torino's hands hadn't stopped shaking since he'd hung up the phone 3 hours ago. At 78, he'd thought the tremors were just age catching up with him, until Detective Rachel Martinez told him about the body they'd pulled from Lake Mead. Tommy the Fish Benedetto. Shot twice in the back of the head, execution style. The same Tommy who'd been working security at the Sands that December night in 1962. The same Tommy who'd seen Vinny rush backstage with that photograph clutched in his sweating palm. Now Vinny sat in his Henderson retirement home, staring at the local news footage of divers hauling Tommy's Cadillac from the murky water. The reporter was calling it a decades-old mob hit finally surfacing, but Vinny knew better. The timing wasn't coincidence. Nothing in Vegas ever was. His iPhone buzzed against the coffee table. Unknown number. "Yeah, Mr. Torino? This is Jessica Chen from Spotlight Productions. We're developing a documentary about legendary Vegas moments, and we'd love to interview you about the night Frank Sinatra stopped his show. We understand you were head of security at the Sands?" Vinny's blood turned to ice water. "Who told you that? We've been researching the story for months, speaking with anyone who was there that night. It's such a beautiful human interest piece, Frank stopping his entire show for a dying child. We want to honor that memory." The same lie the newspapers had printed 60 years ago. But Jessica Chen's voice carried something that made Vinny's survival instincts scream danger. She spoke like someone who already knew the truth and was testing him. "I got nothing to say about that night. Mr. Torino, we've already spoken with several people, including someone who remembers you walking onto that stage. Someone who says you looked terrified." Vinny's grip tightened on the phone. Who the hell was still alive to remember his face? He'd spent 15 years cataloging every person in that room, every witness, every potential threat. Tommy had been one of the last names on his list. "Don't call here again." He hung up and immediately dialed his daughter Sarah in Phoenix. The call went straight to voicemail, again. She'd been radio silent for 3 days, which wasn't like her. Sarah called every Sunday without fail, usually to complain about her ex-husband, or brag about his granddaughter Emma's latest soccer victories. The photograph that had started it all still lived in his bedroom safe, tucked behind insurance papers and his will. He'd pulled it out twice in 60 years, once in 1985 when a reporter got too close to the truth, and again in 2010 when some FBI task force started sniffing around cold cases. Both times, a single phone call to a certain number had made the problems disappear. But that number had been disconnected for 5 years now. The men who'd honored his silence were either dead or forgotten, and their successors had no loyalty to ancient agreements. Vinny walked to his kitchen window and peered through the blinds at the desert landscape beyond his backyard. In the distance, the Las Vegas Strip glittered like a neon mirage, just as it had the night everything changed. He'd been 38 then, young and stupid enough to think he could play both sides. Young enough to believe that saving one kid's life would balance the scales for his silence about the other. The federal judge's son, Michael Brennan, had been returned safely to his family within hours of Vinny's intervention. The newspapers reported that Judge Brennan had suffered a minor heart attack and would be stepping down from the federal bench for health reasons. Case closed. The 5 families had dodged a bullet, and a 6-year-old boy got to live. But the other child, the one whose kidnapping had been staged for the cameras, had vanished into witness protection with a new identity and a story about miraculous recovery. At least, that's what Vinny had been told. His phone rang again. Same unknown number. I said, "Don't." "Grandfather." The voice was young, female, terrified. Emma's voice, but wrong somehow, strained. "Emma? Sweetheart, where are you? Where's your mother? They have us. The man says you know what he wants. He says you've been keeping something that doesn't belong to you." Vinny's legs gave out. He collapsed into his kitchen chair. The phone pressed so hard against his ear it hurt. "Let me talk to them." A different voice came on the line, calm, educated, with just a hint of East Coast refinement. "Hello, Mr. Torino. I think it's time we had that conversation about December 8th, 1962. And this time, you're going to tell the truth." The line went dead. The phone clattered to the kitchen floor, its screen spiderwebbing against the ceramic tiles. Vinny stared at the broken device as if it were a venomous snake, his chest heaving like he'd just climbed 10 flights of stairs. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed and flickered, casting intermittent shadows across the linoleum that seemed to pulse with his racing heartbeat. Emma. They have Emma. He pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to stop the room from spinning. The scent of yesterday's coffee still lingered in the air, mixing with the faint smell of the arthritis cream Sarah had bought him last Christmas. Such ordinary things. Such a normal life he'd built in this modest Henderson home with its beige walls and carefully maintained distance from his past. 15 years he'd been retired. 15 years of Sunday dinners with Sarah and Emma, of helping with homework at the kitchen table, of pretending his hands only shook from age instead of guilt. He'd taught Emma to play poker when she was 8, just for pennies he'd promised Sarah, and watched her blue eyes light up when she'd bluffed him out of his last cent. Smart kid. Too smart, maybe. She'd inherited that from Sarah, who'd always been able to see through his carefully constructed stories about night shifts and casino business. The refrigerator hummed to life, and Vinny flinched at the sound. Everything felt amplified now, dangerous. He forced himself to his feet and retrieved the broken phone, its screen now completely dark. No way to call back, no way to trace the number. Professional work. His granddaughter's voice echoed in his memory, that thin thread of terror beneath her forced calm. Emma was 16 now, a junior at Phoenix Prep, captain of the debate team. She wanted to study journalism at Northwestern, maybe follow in the footsteps of that Barbara Walters woman she was always quoting. Sarah had sent him a video last month of Emma arguing some case about media ethics, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, gesturing emphatically at her debate opponent. Media ethics. The irony tasted like copper in his mouth. Vinny shuffled to his bedroom, his slippers making soft whispers against the hardwood. The house felt different now, not like the sanctuary he'd cultivated, but like a trap. Every shadow in the hallway seemed deeper. Every sound from the street outside carried potential menace. He'd forgotten this feeling, the way hypervigilance could transform a familiar space into enemy territory. The bedroom safe sat behind his dresser, hidden by a reproduction of that dogs playing poker painting Emma had given him as a joke. His arthritic fingers fumbled with the combination, Sarah's birthday, then Emma's, and the steel door swung open with a whisper. Insurance documents, his will, the deed to the house, normal papers for a normal life, and underneath, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, the photograph that had cost him everything and nothing. He didn't need to unwrap it to remember every detail. 2 children, both 6 years old, both brown-haired, both terrified. But only one was supposed to be there. The other was a federal judge's son, grabbed by mistake when some crew of ambitious soldiers decided to send a message to the government. The photo had been taken to prove they had the kid, insurance, leverage, evidence that proved they'd fucked up. Vinny closed the safe without touching the photograph. Some ghosts were better left undisturbed, at least until you had no choice. The kitchen window drew him back, and he stood there watching the desert stretch toward the distant mountains. December in Vegas meant cool nights and crystalline stars, the kind of clarity that made everything seem possible. 60 years ago, he'd driven the same route from the Strip to his apartment, believing he'd saved 2 lives with one desperate decision. The newspaper headline had been perfect. Sinatra stops show for dying child. Crooner's compassion moves audience to tears. Nobody had reported the real story. How Vinny had burst backstage, photograph in hand, and whispered the truth to the most connected man in Vegas. how Frank's face had gone white before he'd nodded once and walked back on stage to make the announcement that would give them time to fix their mistake. How the audience had wept at the beauty of the gesture while 20 miles away, the real Michael Brennan was being quietly returned to his family. The dying child had recovered miraculously, the papers reported. New identity, new family, new life somewhere far from Vegas. A happy ending for everyone. Except now someone with an educated voice and East Coast refinement had Emma and Sarah, and they wanted to discuss December 8th, 1962. Vinny pulled out his backup phone, an old flip model Sarah always mocked, and dialed the one number he'd memorized but never wanted to use. It rang 4 times before connecting. Torino? Jesus Christ. I thought you were dead. I need help, Sal. They took my family. Slow down, Vinny. What family? I thought your wife died 10 years ago. Sal Benedetto's voice carried the same gravelly Brooklyn accent that had gotten him in trouble with casino patrons for 30 years, but underneath the familiar gruffness, Vinny heard something that made his stomach clench. Surprise. Real surprise. If Sal didn't know about Sarah and Emma being taken, then whoever had them was operating outside the traditional channels. My daughter. My granddaughter. Someone grabbed them in Phoenix. Vinny pressed the flip phone harder against his ear, straining to catch any background noise that might tell him where Sal was calling from. They want to talk about that night. December 8th. The silence stretched so long, Vinny thought the call had dropped. When Sal finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. That thing was buried, Vinny. Deep. The people who cared about it are all dead. Tommy Benedetto surfaced in Lake Mead 3 days ago. 2 bullets in his head. Another silence, shorter this time. Shit. Tommy was your nephew, wasn't he? Second cousin. But family. Sal cleared his throat. When did you say they grabbed your people? Today. Maybe yesterday. I haven't been able to reach Sarah since Wednesday. Vinny paced to the window, scanning the street for unfamiliar cars. Everything looked normal, too normal maybe. The voice on the phone was educated, refined, not mob. Could be a cop, FBI. Those federal assholes have long memories. No, Vinny was certain of that much. This felt personal, like someone with skin in the game. The line crackled with static, and when Sal spoke again, his voice sounded farther away. Vinny, I'm gonna ask you something, and I need the truth. That photograph you showed Sinatra, you still have it? Vinny's free hand unconsciously moved toward the bedroom. Why? Because if you do, you need to burn it, tonight. And then you need to disappear until this blows over. I can't disappear. They have Emma. Then you're fucked. Sal's bluntness hit like a physical blow, because whoever took them knows what that photo means. And if they're willing to kill Tommy after 60 years, they're not playing games. The flip phone's battery icon blinked red. Of course, nothing was allowed to be simple anymore. Sal, I need... Listen to me, old man. The people who guaranteed your safety are gone. Dead, retired, or forgot you exist. Whatever deal you made back then doesn't mean shit now. A car door slammed in the background of Sal's call. But I might know someone who can help. Guy named Marcus Webb, private contractor. He owes me a favor from way back. Vinny grabbed a pen from the kitchen drawer and scribbled the name on the back of a grocery receipt. How do I find him? You don't. I'll reach out. But Vinny, this isn't charity. If I make this call, you owe me. Big. The phone's screen flickered. Maybe 30 seconds of battery left, whatever it costs. Yeah, you say that now. Check your email in an hour. If there's nothing there... Sal's voice faded as the connection weakened. Pray your granddaughter inherited your survival instincts. The line went dead just as the battery died. Vinny stared at the blank screen, then at the name scrawled on the receipt. Marcus Webb. He'd never heard the name before, which either made Webb very good at his job or very dangerous to know. Probably both. The house felt different now that he'd broken his 15-year silence. The careful barriers he'd built between Vincent Torino the retiree and Vinny the fixer were crumbling with each passing minute. By morning, there would be no going back to the comfortable fiction of his normal life. He walked back to his computer, a desktop model Sarah had set up for him last year so he could video chat with Emma. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same technology meant to bring his family closer was now his only link to saving them. As the ancient machine wheezed to life, Vinny caught his reflection in the dark monitor screen. The man staring back looked every one of his 78 years, liver spots, deep lines around his eyes, gray stubble that Sarah was always nagging him to shave properly. But underneath the aged exterior, something else was awakening. Something he'd buried along with that photograph and all the other secrets from December 8, 1962. The predator he'd been before he became a grandfather. The email notification chimed exactly 57 minutes later. No sender name, no subject line. Just an address in North Las Vegas and a time, 2 a.m. Vinny deleted the email and reached for his car keys. The Buick's engine coughed twice before turning over, and Vinny sat in the dark garage listening to it idle while his rational mind screamed at him to walk back inside. Lock the doors, call the police, let someone else handle this mess he'd buried 60 years ago. But Emma's terrified voice kept echoing in his head, and rational had never been his strongest suit anyway. North Las Vegas at 2 a.m. was a wasteland of closed auto shops and 24-hour liquor stores, their neon signs casting sickly pools of light across cracked asphalt. The address led him to an industrial complex that looked abandoned until he spotted the single window glowing on the third floor of a converted warehouse. No cars in the parking lot. No signs of life except that lone rectangle of yellow light. Vinny killed the engine and sat in the darkness, studying the building. Every instinct told him this was a trap, but whose trap remained unclear. Could be Webb, could be whoever had Emma, could be both if his luck had finally run out completely. The stairwell smelled like motor oil and decades-old cigarette smoke. His knees protested each step, and by the second landing he was gripping the rusted railing like a lifeline. 78 was too old for this shit. Hell, 58 had been too old for this shit, but he'd been too stubborn to admit it then. The third-floor hallway stretched into shadows, but the glowing window belonged to an office at the far end. The door stood slightly ajar, spilling a wedge of light across the industrial carpet. Vinny approached slowly, his footsteps echoing despite his efforts at stealth. Mr. Torino, the voice from inside, was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40. Please come in. We have a lot to discuss. The office was sparse. A metal desk, 2 folding chairs, a laptop computer, and walls lined with filing cabinets that looked like they'd been salvaged from a government surplus auction. The man behind the desk was lean, sharp-featured, wearing a suit that cost more than Vinny's monthly retirement check. Marcus Webb, I assume. Sit down, Mr. Torino. Webb didn't look up from his laptop screen. Sal Benedetto says you have a problem. Vinny remained standing. You know where my family is? I know a lot of things. Webb's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. I know Tommy Benedetto's body had been in that lake for less than 48 hours when they found him. I know someone's been asking questions about December 8, 1962, and offering serious money for answers. I know you've been living very quietly in Henderson for 15 years, and that quiet just got very loud very fast. The words hit Vinny like physical blows. Tommy had been alive until this week. Someone was buying information. His safe retirement had been an illusion. What else do you know? Webb finally looked up, and his eyes were the flat gray of a winter sky. I know you're fucked, Mr. Torino. The question is whether you want to be fucked alone or with help. They have my granddaughter. So you said. Webb turned the laptop around, showing Vinny a photograph on the screen. Sarah and Emma, sitting in what looked like a hotel room. Both appeared unharmed but frightened. This was taken 6 hours ago. Relief flooded through him so fast he had to grab the back of the chair for support. Alive. They were alive. But the relief curdled quickly when he noticed the details. Emma's Northwestern t-shirt, Sarah's favorite earrings, the careful staging that screamed professional operation. Who took them? Someone with resources. Someone patient. Someone who's been planning this for a long time. Webb closed the laptop with a decisive snap. Someone who wants that photograph you've been sitting on for 60 years. Vinny felt the walls of the small office pressing closer. Sal told me you might have information about an old casino incident. He didn't tell me you were the key witness to a federal kidnapping that got buried so deep it officially never happened. Webb stood and moved to one of the filing cabinets. That took some research. The filing cabinet drawer slid open with a metallic screech that set Vinny's teeth on edge. Webb extracted a manila folder and placed it on the desk between them. The child who died that night, the one whose miraculous recovery made such inspiring news, grew up to become a very successful attorney. District attorney, in fact. Los Angeles County, running for state attorney general next year on a platform of prosecuting organized crime. Vinny's legs finally gave out, and he collapsed into the folding chair. The pieces were falling together with the inevitability of a house of cards in a windstorm. Michael Brennan, now calling himself Michael Brandon. Amazing what witness protection can do for a political career. Webb opened the folder. He's been buying silence for the past 2 years, buying it permanently.